The house you live in right now was designed to last maybe 50 years. Maybe. The builders who put it together knew that. The people who sold it to you knew that. And somewhere deep down, you probably know it too. The squeaking floors, the drafts that shouldn't exist, the rot creeping in around the window frames. After just one bad winter, you were handed a product dressed up as a home. Now consider this. In Gibbstown, New Jersey, there is a log cabin built between 1638 and 1643 by Finnish settlers. No nails, no power tools, no building codes, and almost every single one of its original logs is still standing. Nearly 4 centuries later, that cabin has outlasted every war, every storm, every economic collapse since the Pilgrims landed. And the men who built it didn't have a hardware store within 500 miles. So, what did they know that we've completely forgotten? Picture a man standing on a hillside in the Appalachian Mountains in the early 1800s. His name doesn't matter. What matters is what he's doing. He's not looking at a plot map. He's not waiting on a contractor's estimate. He's watching the trees. He's reading which direction their trunks lean, because the lean tells him the prevailing wind. He's studying which slopes hold frost past sunrise and which ones don't, because that tells him where cold air pools at night. He's looking for oaks and chestnuts and walnut, because those trees grow in deep, well-drained soil. And deep, well-drained soil means no flooding, no mud sickness, no rot creeping up through his foundation. He hasn't built a single thing yet. And he's already made 20 critical decisions that will determine whether his cabin is still standing in 200 years. This man had no engineering degree. He had something better. He had a system, a complete, integrated, time-tested system that modern construction traded away for cheap nails and fast lumber. And you deserve to know exactly what was in it. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me. Do you live in a house that's already showing its age? Cracking, settling, rotting, leaking. And the thing was built in your lifetime, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you see modern construction, and why almost nothing built after 1900 will still be standing when your great-great-grandchildren are alive. Here's what the modern building industry doesn't want you sitting with too long. The average American home today is built from dimensional softwood lumber, 2x4s and 2x6s, held together by wire nails stamped out by the billions. The wall cavities are filled with fiberglass batting that absorbs moisture and compresses over time. The exterior is wrapped in synthetic house wrap and covered with engineered wood siding that begins to swell and delaminate the moment water finds a seam. The foundation is poured concrete, theoretically solid, but dependent on drainage that nobody maintains, sitting on soil that was often compacted and contaminated during construction. The roof is asphalt shingles rated for 25 years, installed by a crew who was there for one afternoon. When you add it all up, you get a house engineered not for longevity, but for a production schedule. A structure assembled like a consumer product with a predictable service life, after which the developer has long since moved on. Compare that to what was built on that Appalachian hillside. Fewer materials, more time, deeper knowledge, and the results standing 2 centuries later in the cold mountain air. Here's where it gets interesting. The shift away from these methods wasn't an accident. It wasn't progress. It was a trade. And you've been paying for it ever since. The first industrial nail-cutting machine was patented by Jacob Perkins in 1795. Before that, hand-wrought iron nails were so valuable that a 1645 Virginia law was enacted specifically to stop settlers from burning down abandoned buildings, just to sift the ashes for nails. Now, a single nail took a skilled blacksmith roughly a minute to forge. That's how precious they were. Once machine-cut nails arrived and the price dropped, and it dropped dramatically by a factor of roughly 10 between the late 1700s and mid-1800s, the entire economic logic of building shifted. Suddenly you didn't need skill, you didn't need pegs and joints and carefully selected timber. You just needed nails and lumber. And once steam-powered sawmills turned living forests into standardized dimensional boards by the millions, balloon framing arrived, a method where any two men with basic carpentry skills could nail together a house in days using factory lumber on 16-inch centers. Traditional carpenters called it balloon framing because they thought it would blow away. They weren't entirely wrong. The knowledge disappeared almost overnight. By the late 19th century, dovetail joinery, mortise and tenon connections, and tree nail fabrication were skills almost no living builder possessed. That is what happened. A centuries-old system of building, proven, refined, deeply connected to materials and land, was abandoned the moment cheaper options appeared. Nobody told you this. Nobody told your parents. The modern construction industry was built on the wreckage of something far superior, and then had the audacity to call what replaced it an improvement. You are not broken. Your house is not an anomaly. You were handed a broken system and told it was the best available. It wasn't. So let's go back to what actually worked. Let's pull it apart, piece by piece. The first principle that mountain men understood, and that modern construction ignores entirely, was site selection. Before one log was felled, an experienced builder studied the land with the precision of a geologist. The mid-slope position was overwhelmingly preferred, and for deeply practical reasons. Cold air is heavier than warm air. At night, it drains downhill and pools in valley floors, creating what meteorologists call frost pockets that can run 10 to 20 degrees colder than the mid-slope just a few hundred feet above. USDA ecological research confirms that valley floors have significantly shorter frost-free periods, precisely because of this katabatic drainage. Ridgetops were equally avoided, exposed to lightning, high winds, and driving weather. That narrow band of hillside between the extremes was warmer in winter, cooler in summer, sheltered from the worst wind and better drained than anything below it. The cabin door faced true south, not approximately south, true south. This wasn't preference, it was thermal engineering. Passive solar warming through the doorway, natural light all day, and reduced snow accumulation at the entrance. The fireplace went on the north or west gable wall, so prevailing winds pulled smoke up and out while that massive stone or clay mass stood between the interior and the bitterest cold. Think of it like this. The cabin itself was a heat machine, shaped by the land to collect warmth and shed cold. No thermostat, no heating bill, just orientation. Technique number 2 was wood selection, and this is where the knowledge was almost surgical. Mountain builders didn't just grab the nearest tree. They understood the biology of wood at a level that we've only confirmed in laboratory settings in the last century. White oak sills, the bottom logs sitting closest to the ground, were chosen because white oak heartwood resists decay even in perpetual contact with moisture and soil. Specimens of white oak live over 450 years in the wild. That longevity isn't cosmetic, it's chemical. Dense, tannic-rich heartwood that actively repels the fungi and bacteria that decompose wood. American chestnut was equally prized. Before the blight devastated North American forests in the early 20th century, chestnut once represented fully half the value of eastern hardwood timber stands. Its high tannin content made it almost immune to rot. Split-rail chestnut fences built in the 1800s can still be found intact in southern Appalachia today. Eastern red cedar, packed with natural aromatic toxins, went into any element that might face insect pressure. Upper wall courses used lighter, easier-to-hew yellow poplar, as documented by the National Park Service in their Federal Preservation Brief on historic log buildings. Winter felling was standard because a sap content was lowest, meaning less moisture to remove during curing. Old-growth timber meant straight, not free logs with thick heartwood and tight growth rings. The wood was already doing its job before a single notch was cut. Modern construction uses fast-grown softwood, pine and spruce with wide growth rings, thin heartwood, and abundant sapwood, the exact parts of a tree with the least natural resistance to rot and insects. The lumber is kiln-dried under artificial heat to meet delivery schedules and then re-exposed to moisture the moment it's framed into a wall. The system is designed to fail slowly enough that nobody notices until the warranty has expired. Here's where it gets remarkable. The corner notch. The way logs were joined at each corner. Modern pressure-treated lumber uses chemical compounds, chromated copper arsenate and its successors, that are effective but leach into surrounding soil and require careful disposal. Pine tar was harvested, applied, and eventually returned to the earth without consequence. The roof completed the system. Hand-split shingles made using a froe and mallet on straight-grained bolts of cedar, white oak, or chestnut were typically 24 to 30 inches long, with only 6 inches of each course exposed to weather. The layering meant that every point on the roof was covered by 3 separate shingles. On a steep 45-degree pitch, which shed water fast and dried quickly after rain, a properly installed shake roof lasted 50 years or more. The craftsman Peter Gott, documented by Mother Earth News, split approximately 15,000 shingles over 25 years working in western North Carolina, noting that the key was splitting with the grain rather than across it. Splitting preserves the wood's natural fiber structure, leaving a slightly rough surface that channels water downward. Sawn shingles, which became common after industrial sawmills arrived, cut across grain fibers and left end grain exposed, exactly where water infiltrates and rot begins. Modern asphalt shingles are rated for 25 years under ideal conditions and fail faster in heat, freeze-thaw extremes, and poor attic ventilation. The shift from split to sawn to asphalt was driven entirely by production speed. At each step, longevity was traded for throughput. Now, you know what worked. You know why it was abandoned. So what do you do with this if you want to build something today? Or repair something that's already failing? Option 1, and the easiest entry point. Seek out reclaimed old-growth timber from barn salvage operations, historic demolitions, or specialized dealers. You can find old-growth Douglas fir, white oak, and longleaf pine heartwood in salvage yards across the country, wood that was alive and growing when these techniques were being practiced, with the tight growth rings and dense heartwood that modern plantation lumber cannot replicate. I'd search the terms reclaimed old-growth timber, antique heart pine, and salvage structural lumber. Use it for sills, posts, exposed beams, wherever durability matters most. Option 2. Apply pine tar to any exterior wood you own right now. Genuine Swedish pine tar, not the petroleum-based imitation, is widely available online and at traditional hardware suppliers. Heat it slightly until it flows, brush it on warm, dry wood, and allow it to cure for several days. Reapply every 3 to 5 years. This is the same preservative used on Scandinavian log structures that have stood for centuries. It costs almost nothing compared to synthetic sealants, and it works with the wood rather than forming a film over it that peels away and traps moisture underneath. Option 3, and the minimum viable takeaway. The next time you assess a building, your own home, a structure you're considering buying, anything, look at the sill logs or foundation framing. Look at how water sheds off the exterior. Look at where metal fasteners meet wood. Look at the roof pitch. You now know what these details mean. You know whether water is being channeled away or invited to sit. You know whether the wood chosen was selected for its properties or selected for its price. You cannot unsee what you've learned today. That knowledge is yours permanently. The mountain man on that Appalachian hillside in 1820, reading the trees, reading the slope, reading the wind before he cut a single log, was not a primitive. He was a master. He was an engineer who had internalized centuries of accumulated human intelligence about materials, weather, biology, and physics, and who built things that are still standing 200 years after he was buried. The C.A. Nothnagel cabin in New Jersey, built in 1638, still holds nearly every original log. The structures at Cades Cove in the Smoky Mountains, the Arnwine cabin in Norris, Tennessee, the Jacob Wolf House in Norfolk, Arkansas, these aren't curiosities. They are proof. The knowledge wasn't lost. It was abandoned, traded for a nail machine and a production schedule. And then the people left, holding the products, were told the failure was theirs. It wasn't. It never was. We're on a mission to uncover the building knowledge, the food knowledge, the land knowledge, and the self-sufficiency knowledge that the modern industrial world buried under profit margins and quarterly targets. Subscribe if you believe there's something worth recovering, and tell us in the comments, what forgotten craft or building technique do you want us to investigate next? We're listening. Wasn't just a way to stack logs, it was a machine. The dovetail notch, perfected by German and Swiss settlers who were, by all historical accounts, extraordinary axe workers, cut trapezoidal angles into each log face so that the weight of the structure itself pulled the joints tighter. NPS preservation research documents that dovetail corners bear 70 to 80% of a building's total weight. Every pound added to the cabin, every roof load, every snowfall, every decade of accumulated wood drove those joints tighter together. And the angle of the cut shed rainwater to the exterior. The joint was simultaneously a structural lock and a drain, the saddle notch, brought by Finnish and Swedish settlers who arrived in the Delaware Bay as early as 1638, was designed in the ancient Norwegian compression fit tradition to grow tighter as logs dried and shrank over their first 1 to 3 years. The V-notch, common among Pennsylvania German builders, formed a self-draining peak at every joint with no flat surface where water could sit. These were not rustic approximations of modern joinery. They were precision systems that got stronger with time rather than weaker. If you are finding this valuable, subscribe right now because we're just getting started. Chinking and daubing came next, and the recipe was more sophisticated than it sounds. The gap between each log wall course was sealed in 3 layers. First, rigid blocking, wood chips, stones, even corn cobs, wedged tightly to fill the bulk of the space. Second, a soft packing layer of moss, oakum, dried clay, or animal dung pressed in as insulation and secondary seal. Third, an outer daub of wet clay mixed with lime and animal hair, deer hair in the Appalachians, hog or cow hair in the Midwest, kneaded in as fiber reinforcement to prevent cracking. The animal hair performed the same function as rebar in concrete. It distributed stress across the surface so that freeze-thaw cycles couldn't propagate cracks through the whole mass. It worked, documented by restorer John Van Arsdal, who has spent over 25 years working on structures, including the Breckenridge House in Abingdon, Virginia, built around 1769. The original daub and surviving cabins shows no chemical deterioration, only mechanical cracking from settling. Modern spray foam insulation, by contrast, degrades in UV exposure, loses its seal when wood moves, and harbors moisture rather than shedding it. Wooden pegs, called tree nails, held the structural timbers together without a single metal fastener. Black locust and white oak were preferred because they were harder and denser than the surrounding material. The manufacturing was elegant and clever. Green-cut pegs were driven into holes, bored slightly smaller than the peg itself, creating an initial friction fit. Then the wood absorbed moisture from the surrounding timber, swelled, and locked itself permanently in place. An assembled tree nail joint becomes nearly impossible to pull apart without destroying the wood around it. Builders also use draw boring, offsetting the holes in the mortise and tenon, so that driving the tapered peg through physically drew the joint tight under tension. And unlike iron nails, tree nails expanded and contracted on the same seasonal moisture cycle as the surrounding wood, maintaining joint integrity through the decades that would have loosened or corroded metal. Builders have long understood this phenomenon. They even had a term for the failure mode they were avoiding: nail sickness, the accelerated decay that concentrates around rusting iron fasteners. No metal, no rust, no nail sickness. The joint lived as long as the wood did. Pine tar was the preservative applied to every exposed surface, every joint, every roof junction where water might threaten. North Carolina's longleaf pine forests, which once covered 90 million acres, made the colony the leading tar producer in the Atlantic world. which is exactly why North Carolinians have been called Tar Heels since the colonial period. The British Naval Stores Act of 1705 created bounties to foster production precisely because pine tars was that essential. 1 quart of pitch pine yielded roughly 40 to 60 gallons of tar. Applied to shingles and sill logs, pine tar sealed moisture out and provided natural resistance to insects. Linseed oil, derived from flax, added a secondary moisture barrier to exposed wood surfaces. But bark removal itself was a preservation act, stripping the outer bark and soft sapwood to expose only the dense heartwood dramatically extended structural life.